My name is Ellis Wren, and this Christmas Eve I stood outside my mother's house, invited by name, rejected by blood. The door opened. She looked me straight in the eyes, and rolled hers so hard I thought they'd vanish into the back of her skull. That sound, the latch slipping back into place, echoed louder than the laughter inside, louder than the holiday music, louder than the 3 years I'd spent trying to believe I could come home again. I wasn't a stranger. I was her daughter. But that night I became a guest, an unlisted name, a complication. I didn't knock twice. Behind her, candles flickered, wine glasses clinked, someone wore a sweater stitched with bells. And in the window, for just a second, I saw my little sister, Sophie, watching through the curtain like someone glimpsing a ghost. And maybe that's what I'd become. But ghosts don't stay cold forever. Some of us come back with the truth. Before I tell you how I found a letter that was never meant to be read, before I show you what was buried in the garage beneath a fake family tree, and before you see who opened the door, not to let me in, but to finally walk out themselves, tell me, have you ever been erased by your own family and made to feel like it was your fault? Have you ever brought truth to a house built on silence? If you've ever stood outside someone else's warmth, holding an invitation that meant nothing, this story is for you. Leave a comment if you've ever had to choose yourself when no one else would. Tap like if you believe justice can be quiet and still undeniable. And subscribe if you're done asking for a seat and ready to build your own. Because I didn't come back for a chair. I came back with the deed. The sound of the door unlatching echoed louder in my ears than the Christmas music spilling faintly from inside. For a second, a ridiculous, fragile second, I thought maybe things had changed. That maybe 3 years apart had dulled the sharpness, cracked the ice, done something. Anything. But then I saw her face. Meredith. Perfect posture, tailored navy dress, lips pinched like she'd bitten into something sour. Her eyes locked on mine, scanned me from boots to scarf, then rolled so theatrically I almost laughed. Almost. The way you might at a funeral, when grief and absurdity collide. Ellis, she said, as if the name had dust on it. You're here. My breath fogged between us, visible proof I was still alive and standing. I pulled the folded invitation from my coat pocket, the gold embossing now smudged from being held too tightly too long. I got this 2 weeks ago, from Nancy. She wanted me here. Meredith didn't take it. Her manicured hands stayed folded neatly across her stomach like a judge at sentencing. Something's changed, she said. And there it was. The shift. The moment my hope cracked like ice underfoot. The list was updated. Security wasn't notified clearly. Behind her, laughter rose. Warm, familiar. I caught a glimpse through the hallway. People holding wine glasses, someone wearing a ridiculous Christmas sweater, a child darting between legs. Then I saw Sophie. She was standing behind the sheer curtains of the front sitting room, barely visible in the glow of the tree lights. Her hand pressed to the window, her face unreadable. And before I could lift mine to wave or plead, she was gone. Whisked away. Maybe by choice, maybe not. I'll never know. I took a step forward. Meredith, it's Christmas Eve. I'm aware, she replied, and the frost in her tone rivaled the air between us. Which is why this conversation should be brief. I bit the inside of my cheek. I just want to see my mom. She's busy. Busy? My voice cracked. Throwing a party while her daughter stands outside in the snow? You don't belong here. The words came out flat, practiced, as if she'd rehearsed them. This family moved on. Maybe you should too. And then the door closed. Just like that. No slamming, no drama, just a quiet, devastating click as the lock slid back into place. The snow didn't feel cold anymore. My gloves weren't thick enough to keep the sting out, but I didn't move. Not right away. I just stared at the wood grain of that door, the tiny wreath above the knocker, the brass handle that had once seemed too high to reach when I was little. I stepped back slowly, boots crunching against the salted walkway. A porch light flickered above. The warmth inside the house glowed behind frosted windows, painting the snow with gold and red and green. A scene from a holiday card if you ignored the girl standing outside. I pulled my phone out, fingers numb. The screen lit up, too bright, reflecting my own face back at me. Eyes rimmed red, lips trembling. I opened a text thread I hadn't touched in over a year. To Mom, I was outside. Meredith said I wasn't on the list. I hit send, and then I did something I hadn't done in months. I turned the phone off. Tears fell, not from the cold. When my dad pulled up, I expected questions. Instead, he handed me a cup of hot chocolate and said, "Get in. We're not done yet." The passenger door of his black Tesla swung open with a whisper, and the scent of cinnamon and cocoa drifted toward me like a hand extended in silence. I stood frozen for a second, snowflakes clinging to my scarf, cheeks numb, heart colder than the air around me. Graham Wren wasn't known for grand gestures. He wasn't known for showing up. But here he was. He didn't ask what had happened. Didn't ask why I was standing on a curb in Evanston on Christmas Eve, soaked with grief and snow. He just nudged the steaming cup toward me again, eyes not meeting mine. I got in. We drove in silence, the kind that used to stretch thin between us like glass, always at risk of shattering. But tonight it felt like something else. A quiet truce. The heater hummed, warming my gloves and the tips of my ears as I cradled the cocoa. I hadn't had hot chocolate since I was a teenager. Graham always added cinnamon, just a pinch, like he was afraid of flavor but didn't want to admit it. When we reached his penthouse, I remembered why I rarely came. Not because it was unwelcoming, but because it felt like a hotel lobby dressed in bachelor grayscale. Neat, expensive, unlived in. But tonight it felt like the only place left in the city that wasn't lying to me. He took my coat, hung it on the rack by the door, and wordlessly pointed me to the couch. The television was on, showing a Christmas parade in downtown Chicago, floats glittering and choirs singing, but Graham clicked it off within seconds. The silence returned, but it was softer now. I used to think, he began as he poured the rest of the cocoa into a ceramic mug, that silence meant peace. That if we didn't talk about something, maybe it would go away. I said nothing. He placed the mug in front of me, then sat in the armchair across the coffee table, hands steepled. "Your mom almost took her life once," he said. The words dropped like stones into the stillness. I blinked. "What?" "It was years before you were born. Meredith was already in the house then. Your mom was cornered. Between the pregnancy, your grandfather's expectations, and Meredith pulling the strings. She left a note. I found her just in time." I held the mug tighter. She doesn't talk about it. She thinks it makes her weak, but it wasn't weakness. It was Meredith, always Meredith. His voice was still low, but there was something raw scraping just beneath. I looked down. The marshmallows had melted into a swirl of brown and white. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "I thought I was protecting you." "From what?" "From knowing your family is built on debts and control?" He gave a sad laugh. "Turns out silence isn't peace. It's just a different kind of wound." My phone buzzed. A message from Lana. Just 3 words. "Check your email." I opened it. There, in a scan lit by the glare of a desk lamp, was a letter in my teenage handwriting. I knew it before I read a word. It was the letter I wrote to Sophie. The one I slipped under her pillow the day I left for college. The one I was told was never found. "Dear Soph, I know things have been weird. I'm sorry. I just didn't want to say goodbye like that." The ink wavered slightly where I'd pressed too hard. The edges were torn, as if it had been ripped at some point. My breath caught. "She never got it," I said aloud. Graham leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I knew Meredith intercepted it." "You what?" "I saw her with it. She read it, folded it, and tossed it in the shredder. He didn't flinch. I said nothing. I didn't want to start another war. I stared at him, at the man who once told me that family should come first, even when it hurt. At the man who watched my mother fade, who let Meredith run the house like a monarchy. You let her erase me. He didn't defend himself. I did, and I was wrong. Silence again, this time thick with the gravity of too many years. Then he stood, walked over, placed a hand gently on my shoulder. But I'm not staying silent anymore. I looked at him. We're going back, he said. But this time not to ask for a seat, to remind them you never left the table. In my lap, the letter still glowed faintly from my phone screen. I scrolled to the end, where the final line was almost smudged beyond recognition. I miss you. I always have. The letters blurred again, but not from age, from tears. We didn't ring the bell. We just stood there, two people with nothing left to lose but the truth. The snow crunched beneath our boots like old paper being torn. The yellow lights of the Meredith mansion glowed warmly behind frosted windows, casting elongated shadows across the front yard. Inside, laughter bubbled like champagne. Distant, disconnected. From out here, it felt like another world. Graham stood beside me, silent as always, coat collar raised, his breath visible in the cold night. I held the letter in my gloved hand, fingers trembling, not from the temperature, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I'm not going in, I said. He nodded. I didn't think you would. Instead, I stepped closer to the porch but didn't climb it. Just enough so I could see the silhouettes through the windows. I spotted Nancy, my mother, standing by the grand piano with a glass of red wine in hand, her face polished into a porcelain smile. Then, behind the curtain, a familiar figure. Quick, hesitant. Sophie. I raised my hand. Not waving, just holding it up, open, as if to say I'm still here. The curtain twitched again, and then the front door creaked open, not wide, but enough for a cold breeze to slip out. Sophie. She peeked through, eyes wide, breath catching when she saw me. Ellis? Can you come out? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, but the door opened farther and she stepped out onto the porch, hugging a shawl around her. Her makeup was perfect, her dress velvet green, but her expression was anything but festive. Does Mom know you're here? No, I said. Not yet. Behind her, another figure appeared. Nancy. Her heels clicked against the floor as she moved toward the threshold, confusion etched across her face. When she saw me, her mouth opened slightly, more surprise than welcome. What are you doing here, Ellis? You can't just... I don't want to ruin your party. I cut in. I just need you to look at something. I held out the folded letter. Nancy didn't take it. Her brows furrowed. What is that? Something you never saw, I said. But should have. Sophie stepped forward, curiosity flickering in her eyes. She gently took the letter from my hand, unfolding it like it might shatter. Her eyes scanned it once, then again. Wait, she started, voice breaking. I remember this. Nancy blinked. What are you talking about? I remember this letter, Sophie said, more to herself than anyone else. The handwriting, the paper, I saw Meredith with it, in the kitchen. Graham didn't move, but I could feel his breath change. The way you hold still when truth begins to break free. You never got it, I said to Sophie, because Meredith took it. She shredded it. Nancy shook her head slowly, the wine glass still in her hand. Number, that's not... I've never seen this letter. She didn't want you to, I said. She made sure you never did. Sophie's hands trembled. I was 16. I remember asking Meredith why you never said goodbye. She told me you didn't care anymore. And you believed her, I whispered, though there was no venom in my tone. Nancy opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face was a storm. Years of guilt, confusion, denial, all wrestling for dominance. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe in her mind I was. She lied to all of us, Graham finally said, his voice low but steady. And we let her. A silence fell, thick and electric. Snow fell more heavily now, muffling everything, except the truth hanging in the air. Then Nancy looked at me, her eyes glassy but not softened. "Why didn't you come to me?" My chest tightened. "I did," I said, voice raw. "You just never opened the door." Everyone paused when I walked into the dining room, not because I was unexpected, but because I wasn't supposed to be there. The clinking of crystal stopped mid-toast. Forks hovered mid-air. A few guests shifted in their seats, unsure if they should keep smiling or brace for impact. Meredith stood at the head of the long mahogany table, one hand still raised with a glass of Chardonnay, her mouth parted in a practiced grin that faltered the second she saw me. The room looked like a scene from a luxury catalog, golden lights woven through a chandelier, candle flames reflecting off silver cutlery, the scent of rosemary and lemon wafting from the roast at the center. My eyes scanned the faces. People who once knew me, now blinking like I was a ghost they didn't want to acknowledge. And there it was. The chair. My old place at the table. Third from the end, near the bay window. Empty. Slightly pushed back, like someone had meant to use it and then thought better. Meredith lowered her glass slowly. "Ellis. Sorry to interrupt." My voice rang louder than I intended. I figured it was time to come in. After all, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded document, holding it up as I walked, slowly, deliberately, around the table toward her. "This says I own half the house." I handed her the paper. For a split second, the candlelight caught the tremble in her hand as she took it. "A fax from the attorney," I said, eyes never leaving hers. "Property title. Split between you and Dad. You never took me off the deed." Meredith scanned it quickly, but the flick in her eyes gave her away. She already knew. What she didn't expect was for me to know too. A low murmur rustled among the guests. Graham stood then, the scrape of his chair loud against the polished floor. He reached over and pulled back the empty chair. My chair. I sat, the velvet of the cushion unfamiliar but solid beneath me. No one spoke. The clink of silverware resumed awkwardly. Someone coughed. A waiter entered, unsure whether to refill my glass or pretend I wasn't there. Meredith waved him off with the smallest flick of her fingers, her hostess mask reassembling piece by porcelain piece. Sophie stared at me from across the table. Not in accusation, not in fear, just confusion, and something softer I hadn't seen in years. I didn't speak right away. I waited until the lull between bites, when every ear was waiting to see if I'd break the silence. "You know," I began, running a fingertip along the edge of the linen napkin. "When I was 11, Christmas dinner was here. Same room, same table. I dropped a glass of cider on this end." I nodded to the corner and burst into tears because I thought I'd ruined everything. A few faces turned my way, half recognizing the story. But Meredith just smiled and said, "Well, now the floor is festive too." Everyone laughed, even Mom. I looked around again, this time locking eyes with my mother. She didn't speak. Her lips pressed tight, but her gaze didn't turn away. "I remember thinking," I continued, "that home wasn't about being perfect. It was about being allowed to be messy, to spill things, to be forgiven." The silence after that was heavier than any accusation. You could hear the scrape of a fork against porcelain like a thunderclap. Meredith set down her wine glass. "You're trying to ruin this night." I turned to her, meeting her tone with calm steel. "Number you already did. I'm just letting everyone remember it." Something cracked behind her eyes, but she didn't speak again. And then, quietly, Nancy stood. No explanation. No theatrics. She placed her napkin on the table, pushed back her chair, and walked away, heels tapping against tile until she disappeared through the hallway. For the first time in my life, she didn't choose to stay with Meredith. She chose to leave. The last present under the tree wasn't wrapped. It was buried. The snow behind the house was untouched, blanketing the lawn like no one had dared disturb it. Nancy walked ahead of me, her coat clutched tightly at the collar, eyes straight ahead, expression unreadable. Graham followed silently, the crunch of our steps the only sound in the still evening. We approached the old garage, a structure I hadn't stepped into since I was 16. It used to smell like varnish and dry pine needles, filled with plastic bins marked X-Mass in black marker, boxes of tangled lights and broken ornaments. But tonight, it felt like the threshold to something deeper. Nancy fumbled with the rusted latch and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in protest. The scent hit me first. Dust, old paper, cold air trapped with time. A single pull-chain light flickered above, casting long shadows over the shelves. She moved toward the back corner, to a low cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. "I didn't come out of that dining room because of you," Nancy said suddenly. "I came out because I realized I'd been sitting at the wrong table for too long." She knelt down and pulled out a cardboard box, labeled Cedar Hills Storage. Her fingers trembled as she peeled back the lid. Inside were files, folders, letters in faded envelopes. On top, a bright blue folder stamped with the emblem of an old scholarship fund. I blinked. "These are mine," I murmured, flipping through the forms. My handwriting, my essays, recommendation letters, all still neatly filed, never mailed. I looked up. These were for my college applications. Nancy nodded slowly. "You gave them to Meredith. Said you wanted help." My breath caught. She told me I didn't qualify, that it was too late. "She never sent them," Nancy whispered. "I found them here years later, but She hesitated. "I didn't know what to say to you by then." I stared at the papers, unable to process the small theft of an entire future. Nancy reached deeper into the box and pulled out a thick envelope, tied with twine. She untied it carefully, almost reverently, and unfolded a letter. It was on parchment paper, handwritten in dark blue ink. "It's from my father," she said. I thought I'd lost it. Graham stepped closer. She handed him the page. He read slowly, lips moving silently, eyes narrowing. "It's a grant of ownership," he said after a moment. He left a parcel of land, the one in Cedar Hill, to Ellis. Not to the family, to her. I took the letter from his hands. My name was there, my full name, clear as day. The signature at the bottom scrolled in ink that had faded but was unmistakably deliberate. Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "I was pregnant with Sophie when he gave it to me. Meredith said she'd keep it safe. She always called herself the gatekeeper of things like this. And you let her be," I said quietly, not accusing, just stating what was. She wiped a tear. "I didn't lose you. I just never fought to keep you." I didn't respond. I reached into the envelope, removed the file, and tucked it carefully into my coat pocket. It felt weighty, heavier than just paper, like the beginning of something that had been paused mid-sentence. No one said anything as we left the garage. Back in the warmth of Graham's car, the silence was soft rather than sharp. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and scanned the pages one by one using the app I hadn't used in months. The last image uploaded, and I hit send. To Harper Lewis, Esquire. Subject, reclaiming what was buried. I didn't wait for an invitation, I built the room. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft chime as it opened, letting in a gust of crisp December air and the faint smell of pine still lingering from the holidays. The early sunlight filtered through the front windows, warming the amber-toned wood of the counter. It was quiet, peaceful, almost sacred. The name etched on the glass read Ellis and Company in the same looping script my grandmother used on her jam jars. She'd always dreamed of reopening this space, and after everything that had happened, I knew there was no better place to start again. Not by reclaiming my seat at someone else's table, but by building my own. The first customer walked in just after 8. Sophie. She hesitated for a moment, like she was stepping into a memory, not a room. Her hair was pulled back, cheeks flushed from the cold, and she looked both older and younger than I remembered, like someone caught between guilt and hope. I smiled. "You want something warm?" She gave a small nod. "Whatever you're having." I poured 2 cups, slid one across the bar to her. "I didn't expect you to be open so soon," she said, eyes scanning the space. The photos on the walls, the jars of biscotti, the vase of fresh branches by the window. "This place feels different." "It is," I replied. I finally made it mine. She sat, hands wrapped around the mug. "You're not angry?" I took a breath. "I'm not waiting anymore." The door opened again. Graham walked in first, then Nancy, more tentative. He gave a small wave. She looked away before slowly finding her seat at the end table. There were no grand apologies, no dramatics, just the quiet sound of a family finally learning how to sit still together, not in obligation, but in acknowledgement. A man in a gray overcoat entered a moment later. Harper, my lawyer. He gave me a polite nod and pulled out a folder. "Finalized this morning," he said. "The Cedar Hill deed is clean. Everything that should have been yours is now officially in your name, including the trust assets Meredith withheld." She didn't contest. Sophie looked stunned. "She just let it go?" "She sent this," Harper said, sliding a white envelope across the counter. Inside was a cream card. No signature, no warmth. Just 4 words printed in fine serif. "Do what you must." I folded it and placed it in the trash without a word. There was nothing left to argue. Sophie glanced toward the window, then back at me. "You could have burned everything down, but you didn't." I stirred my coffee slowly. "They told me I didn't belong, so I built a place where I do." She didn't answer, just reached across the counter and placed her hand lightly over mine. No apology, no excuse. But it was enough. The cafe filled slowly. A few cousins I hadn't spoken to in years stopped in for espresso, more curious than contrite. I didn't mind. They weren't the point. I wiped down the counter, turned off the closed sign, and sat by the window, coffee in hand. Outside, the snow had melted into slush. A boy pulled his sister on a sled, her laughter echoing down the street. Life, unapologetic, kept moving. I raised my cup, took a sip. "Next Christmas," I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. "I won't knock." I didn't go back to that mansion. Not again. The funny thing about building your own table is that you stop checking who's sitting at theirs. And when the weight you carried for years, the unanswered questions, the letters that never arrived, the looks that burned instead of embraced, finally lifts, what's left is stillness. Not silence, not bitterness. Just the kind of stillness that comes when truth no longer needs to knock. I didn't need Meredith to say sorry. I didn't even want her to, because I saw it. In the cracks behind her cold note, in the empty seat she didn't bother to fill at Christmas dinner, in the way her name wasn't whispered in admiration anymore, but in caution. Power built on manipulation always crumbles at the first touch of truth. Nancy tried. She really did. Maybe not when I needed her most, but in the end she chose to walk out. That counts for something, even if it doesn't fix everything. Sophie came first. Quiet, unsure, but present. And that's more than I can say for most. But Graham, my father, he showed up. He handed me hot chocolate, not excuses. He let me sit in silence without rushing me to talk. And when I finally did, he didn't flinch at the truth. That alone began a healing I didn't think I deserved. The moment I hung the Ellis and Company sign on the window, I knew. I wasn't just reopening a shop. I was opening a chapter that no one could tear out, burn, or bury. The lawyer came, the papers were signed, and the property that had been buried with old lies now had my name carved onto it, legally and emotionally. There was no applause, no grand confrontation, no public downfall for Meredith. But she lost. Not because I shouted louder or fought dirtier, but because I no longer needed her approval to breathe. That's the thing about doors. Once you realize you don't need to walk through the ones that slammed in your face, you start building rooms with better views. And next Christmas, I won't knock. There are moments in life when silence feels safer than the truth, when knocking on closed doors seems easier than walking away. But those who rise from betrayal with clarity and strength don't ask for permission to exist. They reclaim what was stolen, not just assets, but dignity, voice, and space. Ellis Wren didn't burn the house down. She simply built her own. And in doing so, made the foundation of every lie shake beneath its own weight. Justice, when earned, doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it enters quietly through the side door, carrying nothing but old letters, forgotten deeds, and unshaken resolve. Because no wall of deceit stands forever against the tide of truth, and no one stays forgotten when they learn to remember themselves. Thank you for staying until the end. Maybe you've never stood outside a door in the snow, holding a letter no one wanted to read. Maybe your silence didn't come on Christmas Eve, but on a Tuesday night, at a birthday dinner, or in a room where your name wasn't said aloud once. But if you've ever carried truth that was too inconvenient for someone else's story, if you've ever been cut out, then blamed for bleeding, then you know what this was really about. It wasn't about Meredith. It wasn't about the letter, the deed, or even the missing chair. It was about remembering I was always part of the story. They just chose to forget. And here's what I want you to remember. If you've ever lived through something similar, you are not what they made small. You are not what they edited out of the family photos or the dinner invites or the legal papers. You are not the quiet one. You are the one who saw everything and still came back with truth. You don't have to shout to be right. You don't have to burn bridges to build something stronger. And you don't need permission to begin again. So, if this story held a mirror to your own, even just for a moment, leave a comment. Tell us, what letter never reached you? What door stayed shut? And what did you build anyway? Tap like if you know the weight of being excluded and the fire of reclaiming yourself without apology. Subscribe if you've ever been called dramatic or difficult or too much, just for asking to be seen. This space, this community, is for those who've stopped asking to be invited in. It's for those who've realized you don't need their table when you've got your own foundation. And Ellis? She didn't knock again. She didn't scream. She didn't wait for her name to be spoken with pride. She simply spoke it herself, then built something no one could erase. Thanks for listening. Thanks for still standing. And thank you truly, Adele, for remembering sometimes the strongest voice is the one that walks away without flinching.